So we say that the symbol is called the radical, and what's under the symbol is called the radicand. And those will be two names that I'll be using rather frequently. So we would say that the square root of 4 is 2. Now, why is the square root of 4 2? Because when you square 2, it's equal to 4. So what the radical is, or a square root is, it's the unsquarer. The radicand is a number which is squared. And when you take the square root of something, you're saying, what do I multiply times itself twice to get that? So, and the square root of 144 is 12, and that is because 12 squared is 144. So this right here, these are radicands. That's what I would find under the radical. And this right here are square roots. So we know the square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 1 over 49 is 1 over 7, because 1 over 7 times 1 over 7 is 1 over 49. The square root of 25 over 36 is 5 over 6. The square root of 121 is 11. Yeah. Now we can use a calculator to approximate something that isn't a perfect square, and it's just an estimate. So that if I were to look at my calculator, and I'm going to use my graphers,
8.3 times 8.3.
right? So, and I'm going to clear that off. If I want to do square root is above x squared, always above x squared, and when we get into the last chapter, we'll explain why that's the case. So I would do second square root. Now notice there is a parenthesis. Anything I put in the parenthesis is the radicand. It's as though what it does is it takes that bar and it's going to take it all the way across till I hit the other side of the parenthesis. Then it's going to take the square root of everything that's in that parenthesis. And I want the square root of 72, and that's all I want the square root of, parenthesis. And then when I press enter, I get 8.485281374, and that is accurate to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, for sure 8 decimal places. The 9th decimal place, it might be rounded, it might not be rounded, depends upon the calculator, but certainly up until the 1 before this guy, it is accurate to that many decimal places. This thing goes on forever. It's called an irrational number. And so when we start rounding, and if we would say, how many decimal places did it say? 2 places. So I would round this to 8.49 because 5 is bigger than 4. 5 is where you would start rounding. So it would be approximately 8.49. So approximately 8.49. And this is just an estimate. And I can say this is due to rounding. So it's now considered an estimate. It's an approximation. Now, you cannot take the square root of a negative number because no real number exists such that that number squared is a positive number. Square means you multiply something times itself. So if I would think about it, a positive times a positive is a positive. So two positive numbers will never form a negative number. And a negative multiplied times a negative is a positive. So if I multiply two numbers that are the same, both negative, I'll get a positive. So that says that if I try to take the square root of negative 16, this is not a real number. It is, however, an imaginary number. And we won't do that until the last section. I think it's 8.7. We'll look at imaginary numbers. Now look at the difference between these two radicals. One has the negative inside, and one has the negative outside. When I look at this guy, this is negative 1 times the square root of 16. Radicals or roots will get done first. So this would be negative 1 times the square root of 16, which is 4, which is negative 4. And that's because the negative is on the outside. When it's on the inside, now depending upon how I have my calculator set up, if I were to try to do the square root of negative 16, that's when it's on the inside, notice what it comes down to. Not a real answer. That's because the negative's on the inside. However, if I take the opposite of, just type it in as I see it, the square root of 16, and now the negative's on the outside, not the inside, and then you're going to come up with negative 4. So if you're doing a calculation, trust your calculator. It's like 0 over negative 4. It's like 0 over negative 4. If you take 0 divided by negative 4, what you would get is 0. And that's what your calculator would tell you. And that's like with your test yesterday. And you say, well, how do I know? Well, if I take 0 divided by negative 4, I'd get 0. However, if I would take negative 4 divided by 0, and I get an error, we'll say division by 0, which means it is undefined. It's not that it doesn't exist, because there is a reason that there's something happens when you divide by 0, which we won't see in this class, but that's why we just say it's undefined. So trust your calculator and not your brain sometimes. Okay, now we've defined what it is. So now we're going to evaluate it. So that says if f of x is equal to the square root of x minus 3, then what is f of 28? Well, it's the square root. Replace x by 28 minus 3, which is the square root of 25. And the square root of 25 is, what's the square root of 25? 5. Find f of negative 1. Well, f of negative 1 is the square root of negative 1 minus 3, which is the square root of negative 4. And what's the square root of negative 4? Not a real number. And that's what we write until we get to 8.7.